Hi, it's Katrina. Alaska is an incredibly beautiful place, but also a dangerous one where many people disappear and there are creatures and secrets around every turn. Let's take a look at the last frontier where Sasquatches have their run of the land and governments try to hide. The mystery of the Alaska Triangle. What do a pyramid, a UFO, Bigfoot, and more than 20,000 disappearances all have in common? Each of these things is connected to the Alaska Triangle. It's like the Bermuda Triangle, but way worse. A place where aliens visit, monsters roam free, and people vanish without a trace. What I'm going to tell you now might freak you out, so I hope you're prepared. The Alaska Triangle is a humongous area stretching between Anchorage, Juneau, and Barrow in the north. The immense triangle overlaps national parks like Gates of the Arctic and Denali. People have reported electromagnetic fields messing with their equipment. There have been reports of paranormal activity, and people say they have seen actual aliens. Let's start in the small settlement of Portlock in the 1950s. Several villagers were attacked, mutilated, and killed by a bizarre creature they called the Nantinaq. You might call it Sasquatch or maybe Bigfoot. Whatever it was, people died and their killer was never caught. Maybe it was a bear, or maybe it was a real beast from ancient Alaskan legend. Did you know that despite being roughly 1% inhabited, Alaska has more missing people on average than any other state? According to the World Population Review, Alaska has 42.16 of 100,000 people missing. That's incredible for all of the wrong reasons. The next worst state for missing people is Arizona, with 12.28 of 100,000 people missing. And Arizona is double the national average. Alaska is straight off the charts. One of the most famous disappearances was that of United States Representative Hale Boggs in 1972. He and Nick Begich, along with one aide and the pilot, disappeared following an alleged plane crash. Yet no wreckage was ever found, and neither were any of the bodies. Hale Boggs was an important member of government, important enough that search parties scoured Alaska for 40 days, but he has still never been found. That's only one case out of thousands. A more recent case is that of Shanna Oman, who went missing on June 3, 2019. Shanna made arrangements to get a ride home with a friend after visiting someone in Fairbanks, but she never showed up for her ride, seemingly evaporating into thin air. She left behind her dog and all of her belongings and has never been found. Many people suspect aliens are responsible for the astounding number of disappearances. The Alaskan wilderness is beautiful, but deadly. But for some, the wilderness is not enough to take all the blame. Is it far-fetched to think that aliens are snatching people away for experiments? Take the disappearance of Gerald DeBerry as a potential example of an alien abduction. This is a very famous case. Gerald was a mountain rescuer in 2011. He went into the White Mountains, 70 miles from Fairbanks, to search for a missing woman. But Gerald never made it back out of the mountains. A year later, his ATV was discovered in the woods with no sign of Gerald. It seemed as if he had been beamed right off his ATV. UFO expert Debbie Zagelmeyer told the Daily Star that because Alaska has a sparse population, it is very attractive to extraterrestrials. Many claim the aliens even have their own base, located deep in the mountains, and any who see it either have their minds wiped or are kidnapped. There is also a chance that the aliens are spying on covert military facilities that the U.S. has in Alaska, which the public doesn't know much about. Secret facilities like the one that allegedly hide the Dark Pyramid, a top-secret extraterrestrial pyramid supposedly protected by the government. But those who have gone in search of the Black Pyramid have never been seen again. Following in the footsteps of a woolly mammoth, the recent analysis of a tusk discovered in Alaska has pieced together the life of a very old female mammoth. A mammoth whose life came to an end at the hands of some hunters 14,000 years ago. This has been one of the most incredible journeys ever recreated by scientists. They retraced the lady mammoth's steps all the way from where she died back to her birthplace in Canada. Scientists have given her a name because she is too important and too interesting not to have one. She is being called Elma. Elmas Tusk was discovered at one of the oldest archaeological sites in the Americas. It's called Swan Point, located at the top of a hill overlooking the wetlands of the Shaw Creek Flats. This place was inhabited by human beings at least 14,000 years ago. The area around Swan Point was traditionally occupied by the Middle Tanana Athabascans. Excavations have turned up traces of ancient fires, tools used for scraping and skinning, and projectile points for hunting. Amidst these prehistoric tools was Elmas Tusk. It's the only piece of her left. Scientists from McMaster University in Canada wanted to learn more about the owner of the tusk. They started by splitting it lengthwise to examine thin layers of ivory inside. These layers formed as Elma grew, just like the rings of a tree trunk. While tree trunk rings can show how old a tree is, mammoth tusk rings work a little differently. Scientists were able to identify different chemical elements and isotopes in each layer, pinpointing exactly where Elma was during every year of her life. Using this sophisticated technique, scientists retraced her steps back to her very beginning. When Elma was born, it was far from where her tusk was discovered. The earliest isotopes in her tusk show that she was born in the Canadian territory of Yukon. She stayed in the same area for the first 10 years of her life. Then she set off on an epic journey that you would need David Attenborough to narrate, or maybe Morgan Freeman. She traveled 620 miles across the Ice Age landscape in less than 3 years. The co-author of this study, Hendrik Pointer, said it was a huge amount of movement for a single mammoth. She adventured all the way into Alaska and then slowed down. The researchers think she possibly belonged to a matriarchal herd, meaning a herd of mammoths led by a sort of queen mammoth. Several newborn woolly mammoth bones were unearthed near Swan Point, along with some fossilized bones of a juvenile. Elma was related to both of them. She likely wasn't roaming alone, but with a large group of family members. They likely operated just like modern elephant herds. Sadly, the group attracted humans. At 20 years old, Elma was taken down by early hunter-gatherers. The people living at Swan Point more than likely ate Elma for dinner. The craziest part to me is that scientists figured all of this out simply by cutting open a tusk. Pretty impressive, right? And now for a quick break, because it's shout-out time. I want to give a big thank you to Alan, Michael, Christy, and Baba Yaga for supporting this channel. Thanks so much for letting us be a part of your day. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. The Deadly Ambush. Evidence of a deadly ambush that left scores of people dead in the snow 400 years ago has been found in the Alaskan permafrost. For the last 4 centuries, the frozen earth kept the evidence preserved. Now, rapidly warming temperatures in the north have unlocked this disturbing cold case. The discovery was made at the archaeological site of Nunalek, which is in the southwest of Alaska on the coast. Archaeologists recovered over 100,000 artifacts from the site, most of them being everyday items used by the indigenous Yupik people. Objects such as eating utensils, a belt made from caribou teeth, wooden ritual masks, and ivory needles used for tattooing. Imagine going to get your next tattoo and the guy pulls out a needle made from pure ivory. The quantity and variety of the objects is astonishing. Take a look at this picture, courtesy of National Geographic Image Collection. This is part of the dig site, a small square of dirt in the middle of nowhere. Because of the frigid climate, the objects were all sealed from about 1660. Rick Knecht from the University of Aberdeen said the woven baskets they found were made of brass, cut when Shakespeare was still writing plays. That should put things into perspective for you. But who were the Yupik? They originated in Siberia and Asia about 10,000 years ago. They crossed the Bering Sea and settled in coastal areas of Alaska. Then, around 1400, communities began moving upriver, deeper inland into Canada's Yukon Territory. Now it's time for the tragic ambush. Rick Knecht didn't just find artifacts, he also found evidence of a brutal massacre that occurred in Nunalek. The skeletons of roughly 50 people were discovered together with their faces down in the mud. The skeletons belonged to women, children, and elders. This suggests they were captured and killed, likely while the men of the village had gone out to hunt or fish. Nobody knows what happened, only that it was an unrelenting slaughter. Rick suggested the destruction couldn't come from a time known as the Bow and Arrow Wars. This was a period in the Middle Ages when the Yupik communities fought one another in terrible battles. The violence coincided with one of the coldest recent times on planet Earth, known as the Little Ice Age. For 550 years, the world dipped into a mini age of ice and frost. It started slowly in the 1300s. Temperatures dipped around the world, with glaciers growing bigger. The Baltic Sea froze, and so did the River Thames in London. Then things got even worse. In the late 1500s, there was a steep decline in the temperature, the Little Ice Age moving into its coldest years yet. Food production was disrupted from Europe to Asia, with violence unfolding around the world as people struggled to feed themselves. In the 1600s, there was likely such little food that previously peaceful Yupik communities warred with each other. This ambush was a result of those hard years and bitter cold. The ghosts of the Erskine House. The Erskine House has been called the oldest building in Alaska. It's also the most haunted, with a ghost story to chill the bones. The Erskine House is in the city of Kodiak. The structure currently houses the Baranov Museum of the Kodiak Historical Society, but that hasn't always been the case. In 1808, the structure was built as a Russian storage facility. At the start of the 19th century, Kodiak was called Pavlovsk. The city had been established in 1793 as the first permanent Russian settlement in North America. This isn't just the oldest building in Alaska, it's also the earliest built Russian structure in the United States of America. The Erskine House acts as a casual reminder that Russia controlled Alaska way before the United States. After Alaska became part of the USA, the Erskine House was purchased by the Alaska Commercial Company. It was used as the company's base of operations until 1911, when it was purchased by businessman W.J. Erskine. But before that, a murder took place. It happened on a cold and blustery day in November of 1886. The victim was Benjamin McIntyre, working for the Alaska Commercial Company and living at their headquarters. Benjamin was sitting in the dining room. It was crowded with people, everyone having dinner. Then suddenly there was a bang. Benjamin slumped onto the table, dead as a doornail. Like something right out of an Agatha Christie novel, he had been shot through the window. Nobody ever caught the murderer or solved the crime. The mystery remains unsolved, and Benjamin's ghost refuses to leave the house. After purchasing the property in 1911, W.J. Erskine converted the building into his own residence. He made some improvements and even built a sun porch. For the next 3 decades, Erskine's house acted as a social hub for the growing community of Kodiak. Weddings and social events were held here. The only issue was that people kept seeing Benjamin's ghost. According to museum manager Michael Bosch, Natalia Pestrikov was a housekeeper who worked for the Erskine family in the early 20th century. She was so terrified of the ghost in the house that she refused to stay inside after dark. A weird balloon. Near the end of March 2024, so really recently, a fisherman discovered a mysterious balloon off the coast of Alaska. It could be connected to a series of alleged spy balloons that have been drifting over U.S. soil. A U.S. official confirmed the discovery with CBS News. The balloon was brought into port to be examined, along with photographs of the object. However, absolutely no additional information was given. The exact location of where the balloon was found, along with the circumstances of its discovery, remained confidential. What's the big deal, though? It's just a balloon, isn't it? Maybe not. There's been some weird stuff going on with spy balloons lately. You might remember in January 2023, a U.S. fighter jet shot down a suspected Chinese spy balloon off the coast of South Carolina. The balloon was outfitted with some seriously high-tech equipment for collecting information. But when asked about the balloon, China said it was a weather research satellite that blew off course. Seems kind of suspicious. A few weeks after that, fighter jets shot down a multitude of unidentified flying objects over the US and Canada. And then, about a month ago, this balloon was found by a fisherman without any explanation. What is going on with all these balloons? The Hairy Man. The hairy man of Alaska is the equivalent of a great beastly Bigfoot, a sort of hairy gorilla that stands 10 feet tall. It's a creature so terrifying that you'll never want to travel to Alaska ever again. Just kidding. In 1985, an Aleut man named Ted Angusan traveled from Bristol Bay to Kulukak Bay on a commercial flight. The plane flew close enough to the ground that as it passed over the small village of Manokotak, Ted saw something hiding in the trees. As Ted told nature writer Bill Sherwinett years later, the creature he saw was giant. It looked sort of like a gorilla, but was darker and covered completely in hair. Ted judged based on the trees around the creature that it stood between 7 and 10 feet tall. Ted looked down at the animal, and it in turn watched the plane fly over. Ted was convinced he had just witnessed the hairy man. At this point, you're wondering, who in the world is the hairy man? If you're not from Alaska, it might be a hard thing to understand. But for centuries, native groups in Alaska have told variations of the hairy man myth. For some groups, hairy man was a gentle giant that lived peacefully as a recluse in the wilderness. But to other groups, hairy man was seen as a vengeful and malevolent creature that was highly dangerous. It's still said that on a quiet night, you can sometimes hear the hairy man screaming somewhere far off in the forest. The stories are so similar that there must be something to them, right? Wildlife biologist Larry Van Daly said he has talked to a lot of people in the Nushagak and Torgyak regions and heard many stories about the hairy man. In all the stories Larry has heard, there is one consistency. The hairy man can run incredibly fast and jump over entire rivers. Would you like to hear about another sighting? In 1957, 17-year-old Myrtle Anilon and her brother heard a tremendous crash outside their home. When they went to look, there were massive tracks outside, huge footprints that looked human, but were too big to be from a person. Later that night, Myrtle and the rest of her family were woken up by their dogs barking. This time, Mom came to investigate with a bright flashlight. When they shone the light at where the dogs were barking, they saw two humongous shapes rustling around. The shapes looked like bears because they were covered in hair, yet they clearly weren't bears. They stood like men on two legs. The family never got a good look at them. The two mystery creatures took off running like they'd trained with Usain Bolt. When the kids asked their mother what they had just seen, Mom replied that they were likely wild people. Wild people is one of the most popular theories to explain Alaska's hairy man. The idea is that feral humans live in the wild. These humans were unleashed in the wilderness a long time ago and lost their humanity. They became barbaric, savage creatures over the centuries. They lost the ability to speak and to reason, were really hairy, and basically reverted back into beasts.
The Mind Control Facility.
Calling all conspiracy theorists. 2 men from Georgia were arrested in October of 2016. They had a small arsenal of weapons and a detailed plan. The 2 men had armed themselves to the teeth so that they could attack a place that many people believe is an Alaskan mind control facility.
It's called the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program Facility, or HARP for short. The men who planned to attack the place were motivated by conspiracy theories on the internet. People believe HARP is being used to control the weather and brainwash the American public. Is it true, though? The government and scientists say absolutely not. HARP was created by the Department of Defense in 1992 to study the Earth's atmosphere. This is true. The research done within the facility helped advance the communication systems of nuclear submarines, just as one example. You have to admit, though, the facility is a little spooky. It's located in the mountains 250 miles from Fairbanks. The facility is also one humongous instrument, a complex of 180 antennas sprawling across 33 acres. The U.S. Air Force is involved, the Navy, and the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, aka DARPA. The isolation and the facility's connection to military organizations makes it a right place for conspiracies. Earthquakes have been blamed on HARP, and some people believe the Space Shuttle Columbia was destroyed by its antenna. Then again, maybe it's Death Ray, or maybe HARP is a weapon for mass psychic warfare. something that will emit radio waves from the atmosphere to melt human brains. In 2016, HARP hosted an open house in an attempt to dispel some of the more alarming conspiracy theories. Sue Mitchell was running the facility at the time. She hoped the open house would allow people to understand the actual science going on behind closed doors. But here we are in 2024, and the conspiracy theories are going strong. What are your thoughts on Alaska's most controversial research center? The Lake Monster. Almost every summer in Alaska, somebody reports a sighting of the Iliamna monster. Out of the more than 1 million tourists who crowd Alaska through June, July, and August, at least one of them beholds the legendary monster. But is the sea creature real or a figment of the imagination? Let's take a look at Lake Iliamna itself. This place is amazing, gorgeous, and wild. It's the biggest lake in Alaska, more than 1,000 square miles. It goes on for 77 miles and dips to 1,000 feet deep in some places. The lake is so large, it has its own weather pattern. And just like Loch Ness in Scotland, it has its own monster. If you've ever seen the Lake Iliamna monster, be sure to tell us about it in the comments. Locals call it Illy. Native Americans have been spotting the beast since long before tourists arrived to Alaska. Those who have seen the monster says it has the body of a killer whale and the head of a wolf. Most people see it from shore and only from a distance. But there have been a few sightings from airplanes, with people claiming they gazed down upon an aluminum-colored fish. Boats have reported being attacked by a creature that left massive teeth marks in their propellers. I'll give you one of the best sightings to think about tonight while you're trying to sleep. In 1967, an Alaskan missionary spotted a monster and told one of his friends. That friend happened to be a fisherman and a pilot. The friend parked his float plane on the lake. Then he went trawling for the monster using stainless steel cable and tuna hooks. He also used caribou meat as bait, figuring he needed something heavy-duty to catch such a creature. He baited the hooks and waited. And then he did what fishermen do best. He took a bit of a nap. The man woke up violently when something snatched the caribou meat from the end of his line and rocked his pontoon. He was physically flung off of it. Then, as he splashed in the water, whatever he had on his line towed his float plane away. He swam to shore and watched helplessly as his airplane was dragged around the lake as if a leviathan had it on a leash. Whatever had taken the caribou bait was a monster in every sense of the word. When he finally got his plane back, most of the steel cables were gone, and the tuna hooks had been straightened. Do you think the fisherman was exaggerating, or did he really almost catch an Alaskan monster? The Ice Age Alaskans. In 2013, archaeologists discovered the ancient bones of a very young girl who died 11,500 years ago. At a campsite located along the Tanana River Valley of central Alaska, archaeologists excavated a burial pit. Inside the pit was the girl's skeleton. She died at only 6 weeks old and was buried next to a stillborn baby. It was a baffling discovery that went unresolved until now. Scientists recently completed a full genetic analysis of the mystery child. It turns out the child belonged to a culture known as the ancient Beringians. If you haven't heard the term before, it's because the name is new. Nobody even knew this culture existed until the genetic analysis. Scientists from the University of Copenhagen assumed the young girl's genetic material would resemble one of the early lineages of Native Americans, but it didn't. Her genetic material was from an offshoot branch of humans that split off from the founders of the Americas 20,000 years ago. This is a mind-blowing discovery that is changing history as it develops. Eske Willerslev, an evolutionary geneticist, said the ancient Beringians are a totally new population of Native Americans. Let me try to break it down piece by piece. 35,000 years ago, a distinct population emerged in Northeast Asia. About 10,000 years after that, they met with another distinct group in North Eurasia. These groups mixed, and their descendants arrived at the Bering Strait 20,000 years ago, when it was frozen. Before them was an ice bridge. The bridge connected Siberia to North America. several waves of the ancient people crossed over the bridge. They were the first human beings to enter the New World. Up until the first Native Americans crossed the ice bridge, though I guess they weren't quite Native Americans yet, no humans had been in the Americas. Not Homo sapiens and not Neanderthals. Most of the migrants pushed south when they reached Alaska. They made like seasonal birds and fled south to escape the cold. Can you blame them? This was the Ice Age. Everything was covered in ice. Living somewhere like Alaska would have been extremely difficult. Over the next 20,000 years, those original migrants diversified. One theory is that they continued dispersing all the way to the tip of South America. They slowly changed, becoming the ancient Cherokee, Aztec, Mi'kmaq, Maya, Chavin, and the countless tribes of the Amazon. That's only a handful of names when there are so many more. That one main group 20,000 years ago morphed into the thousands of cultures that have appeared across the Americas. They were the Adams and Eves of their time. The little girl discovered in the burial pit did not belong to that group of migrants. She belonged to a different founding population, one that didn't push south. Researchers believe that this other group stayed in the north until they eventually went extinct. The next step is to figure out what happened to this mysterious group. How did they fade away, and why did they remain in Alaska when the climate was so brutal? Prehistoric dinosaur tracks. Dinosaurs once roamed the wilderness of Alaska. In Denali National Park, scientists from the University of Alaska recently discovered the biggest single dinosaur track site in the state. They are calling it the Colosseum. The Colosseum is huge, equivalent to about 1.5 football fields. It contains multiple layers of dinosaur prints perfectly preserved in solid rock. It's physical proof that 70 million years ago, generations of dinosaurs thrived in a much different environment than what can be seen today. Maybe the weirdest part is that the trackway is vertical. The footprints are stamped into a layered rocky outcrop that rises like the sheer wall of a skyscraper 20 stories from the ground. The reason the tracks are in such a bizarre position is because of geography. 70 million years is long enough for continents to change and morph. As the tectonic plates collided and buckled, they formed the Alaska Range. Formerly flat ground folded over itself, tilted, and what you see now is the result. The dinosaur tracks were made on flat ground, and now they are moving up a cliff. The Colosseum isn't the kind of place you stumble across by accident. Scientists have to hike 7 hours just to look at the dinosaur footprints. Pat Druckenmiller, director of the University of Alaska Museum of the North, thinks it's worth the trip. He called the tracks beautiful, saying he can clearly see the toes and even the texture of the skin. In addition to the tracks, Pat and his research team identified fossilized plants, freshwater shellfish, and small invertebrates. These discoveries paint a picture of a prehistoric wilderness unlike anything around today. This part of Alaska was home to a huge river system, with plenty of ponds and lakes. It was incredibly warm, with hulking coniferous trees, ferns, and horsetails. As for the tracks, most of them come from duck-billed dinosaurs, although the team also found tracks like this one, which belongs to a carnivorous tyrannosaur. The image is from Dustin Stewart, who published a paper on the tracks as part of his master's thesis. The Haunted Ship. In 1969, a group of Inupiat people were gathered on the northern shores of Alaska between Icy Cape and Point Barrow, also known as the middle of nowhere. As they stood on the shore, they saw something huge coming into view on the horizon. It was a massive ship, a hulking vessel with no visible name on it. However, they knew exactly what ship it was. It had been haunting the coast of Alaska for the previous 38 years. This was the ghost ship Bechimo, a steel-hulled cargo steamship that was produced in the Gothenburg shipyards of Sweden and launched under the German flag in 1914. It was 230 feet long, featuring a reinforced bow that could plow through the icy seas of northern Europe. As a German vessel, I think it's safe to say we know whose side she fought on in World War I. But after the war, that was a different story. The Bechimo became property of the Allies and wound up in the private sector. It was purchased by the Hudson's Bay Company and found its way to the Arctic. At the end of a trading run on October 1st, 1931, the Beichimo got stuck in the ice. It was full to the brim with furs that were worth a fortune, but didn't look like it was going anywhere. It was frozen solid just half a mile from Barrow, Alaska. On October 15th, the Hudson's Bay Company sent an aircraft to save 22 crew members. 15 crew members stayed behind to wait for the ship to hopefully break free of the ice. Then, the unexpected happened. On November 24th, a great blizzard attacked the crew of the Beichimo. They fled for shelter in Barrow, and when they returned after the blizzard, the ship was gone. It had managed to slip free and float 45 miles away. The 15 crew members tracked down the ship, took their furs from its cargo hold, and then abandoned it. The Beichimo wasn't seen again until the native people spotted it in 1969. And it hasn't been seen since. The ghost ship could still be haunting Alaska, or it could be at the bottom of the sea. The Unexplained Golden Egg. 2 miles underneath the surface of the ocean, just off the coast of Alaska, a scientific team made a shocking discovery. They found a bizarre golden blob that might be an egg, or could be a sponge. Researchers with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration are stumped. The research team came across the strange golden orb while piloting a remotely operated underwater vehicle, basically a robot submarine. The orb was tightly adhered to a rock, but nothing else like it was found in the area. Scientists said it might be an egg casing from an unknown species. It could also be a dead and slowly decaying sponge. The rock was dotted with white sponges, though they look quite a bit different from the golden orb. Researchers also guessed it could be a species of coral. The weirdest part was the huge hole in the golden orb. During the live stream in 2023, when the discovery was made, one of the scientists said something either tried to get in or tried to get out. Now, that's a sentence you don't want to hear in the wrong context. What do you think the golden orb is? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know if you've ever been to Alaska.
Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
The Logar Flots. In the year 1345, a mystery began in the lake town of Egilsstadir in Iceland. Locals witnessed a monster in the waters of Lake Logar Flots. They described this monster as a gigantic sea serpent, and it became known as the Logar Flot serpent. It was recorded in medieval scripts in 1589 that the monster was said to have raised its body so high above the water that a ship could have passed underneath. It appeared once again in the 17th century in Icelandic chronicles. The monster was witnessed between 1749 and 1750, discussed in the media in the 20th and 21st century, and even recorded on video in 2012. The mysterious lake worm has been witnessed repeatedly for about 700 years. People have described it as a gigantic worm slithering through the lake. Some have called it a gigantic water slug, and nobody has any idea what in the world it actually is. We know that the lake itself is fed by glacial waters. It's a massive body of water that's below sea level, and the worm is supposedly about 40 feet long. It's even been seen outside the water, coiled like a serpent in the shade of some trees. This thing is basically the Loch Ness Monster of Iceland, and with just as many sightings. In 1963, the head of the Icelandic National Forest Service claimed to see the beast, and it was witnessed again in 1998 by a teacher and her entire class of students. In 1983, contractors laying a telephone cable found that their equipment had been broken by an unidentified creature, and some claim it was the giant serpent. Lost underwater city. Divers came across a group of circular columns and what appeared to be paved flooring off the shores of the Greek island Zakynthos. They believed at the time, in 2016, that they had come across a lost underwater city, a kind of Atlantis situation just off the coast of Greece. The columns looked like they had been shaped by human hands, and the floors were so flat and smooth they looked like the floors of temples or some other ancient buildings. This became an instant mystery and an international sensation. Nobody had any idea what this lost city was, who may have built it, or how old it was. Sadly, the mystery came to a grinding halt when scientists from the University of East Anglia came up with their own solution. According to Professor Julian Andrews, this was no lost city at all, but a geological phenomenon. Instead of archaeological remains such as pottery, the divers had simply come across structures made of hard minerals. These are called concretions, the result of faults underneath the surface releasing gases from deep within the earth. When the gases are released, they cause a change in chemistry of the sea sediment, and it creates a kind of natural cement structure. Even though the circular structures may look like the columns of a sunken temple, they are really just fancy rocks. The Octavius. The Octavius set sail from England in 1761 on its way to the Far East. This was a long and hard journey to make, and not many captains could steer their ships all the way around the world to India. And so, the captain of the Octavius wanted to prove his skill and decided he would try the Northwest Passage on the return trip home. Unfortunately for everyone on board, they were never seen alive again. The ship became stuck in the ice north of Alaska for 13 years. It was discovered on October 11, 1775 by a whaling ship called the Herald. It was found floating west of Greenland, and the entire crew of 28 was frozen and dead below deck, perfectly preserved like human icicles. Unfortunately, we don't actually know if any of this is true. The story of Octavius is a marine legend. The captain's body was supposedly discovered at the table in his cabin, with his pen frozen in his hand. He had frozen to death still trying to write in his captain's log. The last entry was from November of 1762, which indicated the ship had been frozen for 13 years. There aren't any legitimate historical records of the ship ever existing aside from the anecdotes and legends. After the whaling ship departed, the Octavius was never seen again. Some say it's still floating across the seas to this very day as a spooky ghost ship. Corpse ships in Japan. In 2015, Japan was having trouble with ghost ships washing up on its shores. Over a span of 2 months, 12 wooden boats were discovered adrift off the coast of Japan, carrying with them a disturbing cargo. Between the 12 wooden boats, Japanese authorities discovered the bodies of at least 22 people. These bodies weren't freshly dead either, but were already partially skeletonized. 2 of the bodies didn't have their heads. One boat contained 6 skulls for some reason, and all the corpses were vigorously decomposed. They appeared to have been dead and adrift at sea for a very long time, and it wasn't immediately clear where in the world they had come from. The Coast Guard in Japan immediately launched an investigation trying to unravel the mystery of the ghost boats. And while they weren't able to verify 100% where they had started their journey, they did make some educated guesses. The Japanese authorities believed that the boats came from North Korea and that they were carrying desperate North Korean defectors trying to flee the country. Sadly, this became less of a ghoulish mystery and more of a tale of tragedy. One of the boats had scraps of cloth that looked like a North Korean flag, which helped put the pieces together. It appears that the people in the boats fled North Korea by sea, only to get lost in the open ocean with no food or water. The people all perished inside the boats, and their skin literally fell off their bones. Later, their bones were bleached by the sun, before the tide finally brought them to the Japanese coast. The USS Maine. On the night of February 15, 1898, the U.S. battleship Maine was secured off the coast of Cuba. It exploded for an unknown reason that very night, filling the dark sky with fire and tossing dead and wounded sailors like ragdolls into the waters of Havana Harbor. The explosion caused a political catastrophe between the United States and Spain, since they had already been disputing Cuba as the island nation struggled for independence. Shortly after the explosion, the Spanish-American War began. But that's another story altogether. What we want to know is what sank the USS Maine. Over 100 years later, we still don't know. Some experts say it was an underwater mine, some say an accident on board, and some even say a primitive torpedo. There is even a crazy conspiracy theory that says newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst sabotaged the ship. His goal was to force Spain and America to go to war, and that way he could sell more newspapers. The reality is there is no way to solve the mystery all these years later, and we'll probably never know. The history books claim it was Spain's fault, that they had torn a hole in the bottom of the ship on purpose. But according to a study in 1976, the damage was self-inflicted. The study claimed it was a coal fire in the belly of the ship that ignited stacks of gunpowder, an accident that started a war. We may never know for sure exactly what happened to the USS Maine, since the only contributing evidence we have today is the previous studies and 100-year-old photographs. The Legendary Kraken. In 2014, Captain John Bennett's crew dragged an unbelievable creature into their fishing boat. They had been fishing in the remote Ross Sea of Antarctica, and nobody had been expecting to reel in a literal monster. And yet, that was exactly what they found. They hauled a squid into the boat that weighed over 770 pounds, a biblical sea monster which was captured from over 1 mile below the surface. The marine monster was actually a colossal squid, which was about the length of a small bus. The fishermen brought the specimen to shore, handed it over to scientists, and they kept it frozen for 8 months while doing studies. One of the squid scientists involved, Kat Bolstad, said it was an unprecedented opportunity to examine a colossal squid. After all, scientists don't know that much about these aquatic animals. Colossal squid are so big and live so deep in the ocean, it's extremely rare that they are captured in fishermen's nets. But the real mystery is trying to figure out if it's the same colossal squid responsible for the ancient myths of the legendary Kraken. As you may know already, the Kraken first appeared in written history in the 13th century in Icelandic lore, but stories of the tentacled beast can be found much earlier and from all over the world. Scientists wonder if it was the colossal squid that gave birth to these legends, or if there was an even bigger squid that has since gone extinct. A squid so gargantuan, it really could have brought down entire fleets of ships. The road to Atlantis. Scientists in the Pacific Ocean have just discovered the road to Atlantis. Oceanographers doing scientific experiments aboard the EV Nautilus were looking at the floor of the ocean off the coast of Hawaii when they made the discovery in April of 2022. The particular area they were observing happens to be within a massive underwater volcanic mountain range. At a depth of 3,376 feet, near the top of the Nootka Seamount lies the mysterious road. Scientists could not believe their eyes. Even more amazing is that the discovery was made while the team of scientists was broadcasting their 24/7 live stream on YouTube. Everyone who was watching got to see the strangely uniform road of yellow stones come into view. But is this really the road to Atlantis? Or a road to some other ancient submerged city? That's a question that's hard to answer. Scientists say that only about 3% of this particular volcanic range underwater has been explored. This means there could technically be ruins somewhere. Its peaks rise to over 16,000 feet above the seabed, with the tallest summit a mere 200 feet beneath the surface. It's not that outrageous to think the sea level rose thousands of years ago, covering a city that had previously been on an island. However, the scientists were quick to point out that the road, even though it appears to be paved in yellow bricks, is almost certainly a geological formation. It looks like a road, and there is no way at the moment to prove it isn't, but the scientists doubt that it leads to a lost city. Crumbling Shipwreck. Archaeologists discovered a mysterious shipwreck in 2013, buried at the bottom of a stream. But only recently did the researchers begin the long and arduous process of taking the boat apart piece by piece to solve its mystery. The issue is that the shipwreck is old, 1,300 years old to be exact. Its timbers are so fragile that the air itself will destroy them if they aren't sprayed with water every 30 minutes. The boat is currently under the protection of the French National Institute for Preventive Archaeological Research. They say the boat has been carbon dated to around 680 AD, to the Middle Ages. It was originally 40 feet long, and it could have been used to navigate large rivers and shallow coastal waters along France and the Atlantic. The mystery scientists are still trying to figure out who built the boat and what it had been used for. We don't know if it was built by the tribal people of the Franks while they were dominating much of Western Europe after the Roman Empire had fallen, but it does date back to around that time. It may have even just been an ordinary fishing boat. We just will never know for certain. The SS Waratah. Speaking of mysterious boats, let's check out the disappearance of the SS Waratah. This was a passenger and cargo steamship built back in 1908. Its purpose was to travel between Europe and Australia, bringing passengers and cargo across the open seas. But in July of 1909, this ship's second voyage, she vanished while somewhere off the coast of South Africa. She was between Durban and Cape Town when she simply evaporated into thin air with 211 passengers, full of manned crew aboard. Over 100 years later, the mystery has never been solved, and the SS Waratah has never been found. Although it's still a mystery, there are definitely theories. Some say the ship was hit by a freak wave that sucked it into the ocean. Others say that because the Waratah was carrying a massive load of around 1,000 tons of lead and 300 tons of lead ore concentrate, the cargo destabilized the ship and it capsized. Another theory states that the Waratah was caught in a monstrous whirlpool. Fierce winds, raging ocean currents, and a deep ocean trench created a swirling drain of water to suck the ocean liner down into its dark and murky depths. Creepy fossilized brain. Scientists have discovered the mysterious fossil of a marine creature that lived over 500 million years ago. More specifically, they found the perfectly fossilized brain of this creature, a primitive form of prawn that had 3 eyes. Scientists say that thanks to its preserved brain and its complete central nervous system still visible in the fossil, they can now learn more about the origins of the creepiest things in the world, like insects and crustaceans. The creature's scientific name is Stanleycaris hirpex, and it had 2 dangling eyes on stalks with 1 gigantic eye in the middle. It also had spiked claws and lived during the Cambrian period, which was when life exploded in a serious way on the planet for the first time. Even though it was only a prawn, it was the apex predator of its time. The fossil was found in the Canadian Rocky Mountains in a prehistoric graveyard called Burgess Shale. University of Toronto scientist Joseph Moisiuk says he and his team have been able to look at the visual processing centers of the creature's eyes and even see the traces of nerves going into its appendages. It truly was a disturbing life form, and yet it's only one example of what the oceans looked like approximately 506 million years ago. It was a primordial soup of insectoid-like monsters just like this one, all birthed from some cosmic nightmare. Thanks for watching! Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye!